Welcome to Arirang News Special. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Min. We begin in New Delhi, where the second and final day of the G20 summit is taking place on this Sunday. South Korean President Yoon is set to speak at the last session on digital technologies and multilateral cooperation under the theme of One Future. There, he will lay out measures to put his global pivotal state vision into practice. Our correspondent, Oh Soo-young, joins us from the Korean Press Center in the Indian capital. Good morning to you, Soo-young. So it's also the final. Good afternoon. Good morning. It's also the final day of the president's weeks-long diplomacy in Jakarta and New Delhi. Tell us what the atmosphere is like over there.
Well, as you can see, we've woken up to a rather wet and rainy morning, but the mood is very hopeful after the leaders reached consensus on their joint communique on Saturday, amid concerns that differences over Russia's invasion of Ukraine would mean a consensus wouldn't be reached for the first time since the multilateral summit was held in 2008. There has admittedly been a softening of the text concerning Russia's role in the Ukraine war compared to last year's Bali Declaration. But the consensus is still meaningful and quite significant, given the 112 outcomes and presidency documents achieved. Now, in that regard, there's anticipation surrounding the third session today, where President Yoon will be touching upon reforming and strengthening multilateralism. He's been engaging with a number of world leaders, not just in the G20 sessions, but on the sidelines with up to 10 bilaterals scheduled throughout the G20 until today. And also at the gala dinner yesterday, where Yoon and First Lady Kim sat close to Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, US President Joe Biden, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. The dinner provided space for the leaders to hold friendly and candid talks intended to build rapport and trust in the spirit of multilateralism outside the official sessions.
And Soo-young, now let's talk about what's on President Yoon's agenda today, including at the third session of the G20 summit, where he will be speaking.
Of course, Chongmin. The president will speak again at the third and final session, as you said, called One Future, where he'll map out South Korea's role and contribution to building a free, rules-based international order. Now, he's likely to expand Seoul's support for Ukraine and call on G20 members to establish new global norms for the sustainable and ethical advancement of digital technology. Ahead of his arrival in New Delhi, Yoon has told local media that at a time when the world economy is facing challenges such as geopolitical competition, high inflation, and the protracted war in Ukraine, the G20 countries must demonstrate their leadership in order to overcome the challenges facing humanity and move towards a shared prosperity for one future. Now, symbolic of their move to build a brighter future together, leaders on Sunday will lay wreaths at the Mahatma Gandhi's tomb in New Delhi before attending a tree planting ceremony.
And President Yoon has already announced measures in regards to the global response to climate change.
Yes, Chongmin. So that came at the first session of the G20 on Saturday, where President Yoon laid out Korea's specific contributions in order to overcome the global climate crisis. First of all, he announced the plan to contribute $300 million to the Green Climate Fund, or GCF, which provides financing for low-emission and climate-resilient projects in developing countries. The top office says that Yoon is aiming to take the lead in providing financial aid and technical support to countries that lack the capacity to develop green technologies on their own, and also might lack the infrastructure to go carbon neutral. South Korea's Hongdo City actually hosts the headquarters of the GCF, as you may know, which was established under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change back in 2010. President Yoon also pledged to bolster cooperation to help other countries make the transition to clean energy and strengthen energy security based on South Korea's nuclear and hydrogen power technology. In particular, with Korea's plans to accelerate the development of small nuclear reactors and lead the world in mass production and distribution of hydrogen-powered cars. The top office says that the country has the industrial prowess to lead the green transition, which will also help create new export markets for Korea. Now, another point was decarbonising ships and shipping routes. This is now based on Seoul and Washington's pledge last year to create a green cargo shipping corridor that links the port of Busan with the US ports of Seattle and Tacoma. By presenting these ways, South Korea can best contribute and also benefit from the green transition across the world. Seoul hopes to also become recognized as a leading country in climate action, as well as a powerhouse of carbon neutral industries.
All right. And finally, Soo-young, the president's trip to India comes in the year of 50th anniversary year of diplomatic ties between the two countries. We know he's going to meet Prime Minister Narendra Modi before he returns to Seoul. So what do we know about their summit so far?
Right, well, we don't exactly have the time or location just yet, but a presidential official has told us that the meeting is expected to take place today before President Yoon leaves for Seoul. And while President Yoon himself, he has said that when he meets with Prime Minister Narendra Modi, they're going to look to strengthen trade and economic relations, first discussing the 2010 Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement reached between the two sides, as well as the cooperation that they can take in the defense industry and high-tech supply chains. Yoon and Modi will also look to enhance infrastructure cooperation through Seoul's Economic Development Cooperation Fund and ramp up joint research and collaboration in areas like space, nuclear technology, nuclear energy, biohealth, and other key industries. Now, the presidential office has emphasized that India is a very important partner for South Korea, not just because of its sizable young demographic and market potential, but also because the two countries share core values, which include freedom and democracy. Now, on that note, they're going to discuss how they can further that cooperation and also coordinate on global issues, including at multilateral forums like here at the G20.
All right, Soo-young, thanks for your coverage.
My pleasure.
And President Yoon is utilizing multilateral summitry to ensure he meets as many leaders as possible. While discussions may vary with specific topics catered to each country, one thing he says to leaders is being repeated: the request to support Busan's bid to host World Expo in 2030, the vote on which will come in just 2 months. Or Kim Do-yeon has the details.
President Yoon Suk-yeol is using the G20 summit in New Delhi as a stage to have sideline meetings with as many other leaders as possible in order to enhance mutual cooperation and promote Busan's bid to host the World Expo 2030. Just on Saturday, the first official day of the summit, he talked with 10 heads of state. Notably, President Yoon met with the leaders of MICTA, a group comprised of Mexico, Indonesia, South Korea, Turkey, and Australia. The leaders celebrated the 10th anniversary of MICTA's foundation and said that they share deep concerns on the challenging global strategic environment due to increasing divisions in the world and problematic issues such as Russia's invasion of Ukraine and climate change. Together, they pledged to abide by international law and order and enhance cooperation to tackle these challenges. In addition, Yoon met with his Argentinian counterpart, Alberto Fernandez, and discussed ways to strengthen bilateral ties on the back of 60 years since the establishment of official diplomatic ties. The two focus on supply chain reformation and exchanges for battery production. Argentina is one of the richest countries with regard to resources such as lithium, and so South Korea's battery production technology could see the two nations benefiting from each other. According to the presidential office, Yoon also requested Fernandez's support for Busan's World Expo bid. In fact, the office said the president requested support from all the leaders he met on top of discussing bilateral cooperation. What is notable is that of the 10 leaders Yoon met on Saturday, 3 were from Africa, namely Comoros, Nigeria, and Mauritius. The president asked for their support as well because Africa is likely to play a crucial role in the upcoming vote in November, as the continent has the second largest contingent in the Bureau International des Expositions, the Expo organizing body with around 50 members. On Sunday, Yoon will meet with the leaders of Italy and India to wrap up his diplomatic super week. By the end of this overseas trip, including the early ASEAN summit, the presidential office said Yoon will have met with at least 20 leaders from around the world. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
The G20 summit provided an opportunity for President Yoon and his U.S. counterpart, Joe Biden, to reconnect just a few weeks after the Camp David trilateral summit, with the two reaffirming even closer ties. On Saturday, local time, the two met a total of 3 times, one of them being when they sat next to each other during the gala dinner, with an opportunity to discuss candidly about ongoing issues for an hour and a half. Also, according to the top office, earlier in the day, the two came across each other at the venue for bilateral summits. There, Biden joked that Yoon should come home with him since the two spent time together at his vacation spot. Yoon, in reply, said it was an unforgettable moment and an historic one. The two also met at the Leaders' Lounge for the first time at the G20, where Yoon was spotted telling Biden that he was reiterating Seoul, Washington, Tokyo ties for a prosperous world. Despite different views over the war in Ukraine, the group of 20 economies managed to reach a consensus, but stopped short of condemning Russia. Ukraine reacted. The joint declaration was nothing to be proud of, amid world leaders showing mixed reactions. Peun-ji has more.
The Group of 20 has adopted a declaration that backed Ukraine by calling on all states not to use force to grab territory, but it avoided directly condemning Russia for the war. During the gathering in New Delhi, the Indian Prime Minister said on Saturday local time that countries had reached a consensus on a declaration on the first day of their 2-day meeting.
I recently received the good news that on the back of the hard work of all the teams, we have received consensus on the G20 Leaders Summit Declaration.
The consensus was reached earlier than expected, as G20 is deeply divided over the war in Ukraine. Western nations have been pushing for strong condemnation of Russia in the declaration, while others demand a focus on broader economic issues. This year, the statement did not include phrases as strong as those used in Bali last year, when the members deplored in the strongest terms the aggression by Russia against Ukraine, although it noted that there were other views and different assessments of the situation. In response, Ukraine's foreign ministry said the declaration was, quote, nothing to be proud of, and criticized it for not mentioning Russia. The country's foreign ministry spokesperson wrote on social media that a Ukrainian presence would have given participants a better understanding of the situation. But despite disappointment, he thanked Ukraine's allies for doing their part to advance Ukraine's position in the declaration. The leaders of Britain and Germany, however, assessed that the joint statement from the summit was a success. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak called the declaration a good and strong outcome that had very strong language about Russia's illegal war in Ukraine. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz also said the statement demonstrated a clear position on Russia's invasion of Ukraine, saying the territorial integrity of countries cannot be called into question with violence. Peun-ji, Arirang News.
On the sidelines of the G20 summit, global leaders have unveiled a multinational rail and ports plan that links India to the Middle East and Europe. The White House said in a statement on Saturday local time that countries including Saudi Arabia, members of the EU, India, and the United Arab Emirates have committed to work together on the ambitious project. Announcing the pact, U.S. President Joe Biden said it would lead to a more stable, more prosperous, and integrated Middle East. The undertaking, led by the U.S., is also seen as a means to counter China's Belt and Road project. U.S. officials said it aims to link Middle East countries by railway and connect them to India via a port, helping the flow of energy and trade from the Gulf to Europe, while also cutting shipping times, costs, and fuel use. It's been a busy week for the world leaders as a host of high-stakes meetings took place in Indonesia and India, involving Southeast Asian nations and other regional key players. And South Korean President Yoon was no exception. For a wrap-up of his packed diplomatic schedule and what it means for Korea's diplomacy, I'm joined by Professor An Jun-sung from Yonsei University Graduate School of International Studies. Professor An, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Addressing the group of 20 economies, President Yoon vowed to expand Korea's contributions to the Green Climate Fund. The country also plans to expand contributions to help Ukraine. Where does that leave Korea on the global stage?
Yes, according to the South Korean President's office, Yoon administration had come up with brand new, idea called climate change leadership, which means that basically in that respect, President Yoon specifically mentioned that South Korean government will play a role of the green ladder. So I guess that he tried connecting between the developing and developed country at the G20. Right, and in that respect, he's come with two specific implementation plan, plan. That first one is that the South Korean government promised to pay additional $300 million. Right, it's a big number, and also it's the same number that the South Korea has been contributed for last decade. That's 10 years, right? That's a long time. That's big money. Also, that the second thing is that South Korea will provide technical support to developing country in respect of the green energy sector, such as the nuclear and then hydrogen industry, at which the South Korean government, the companies had a competitive edge at the global market. So that's kind of marketing. Also, that's global politics.
And Professor, in just 3 weeks since the Camp David summit, President Yoon again met his American counterpart, Joe Biden, in New Delhi. It looks like the two men are building a personal bond that's closer than ever at a crucial time.
Yeah, well, that's true, right? Well, it's been only 3 weeks, so I guess I don't think they have much things to talk. I mean, discuss it because they're doing the very short time. So I guess that they didn't really have the set up specific official meeting, bilateral, because they don't have much to say. And but however, they has time to chat, between the meetings. So however, there's look at big things, big pictures. To concern, I have a personal concern is that I think that now it's international politics more like community become like bipolarized. Is my side or the other enemy side, right? Basically, so it's a U.S. ally or the Russian ally side. That's really concerning. That in that respect, that administration has taken very specific, expressly side with the U.S. government, right? There's upside and downside, right? Upside was that you have very strong friend behind us, so I guess it will help to solve some issues like North Korean nuclear issues, crises. However, if you look at big picture at the multilateral stage, and many countries, especially like a developing country, look as the strong ally to the U.S. government, means more like a U.S. side, so that we might lose some of our international edge in the middleman strategy as we try to connecting between developed and developed country. That's really the downside for that current strategy.
And President Yoon also plans to hold. He either held and plans to hold an array of bilateral talks with middle and emerging powers, including India and MICTA. In what way do these middle and emerging powers carry significance for South Korea?
Well, it's kind of, it's nothing new, because we know bilateral meeting at the global settings is very, always marketing, also global strategy, also global international politics also. But however, that this time, as I mentioned earlier, like that now it's really things will become bipolarized. So it's I think much difficult for South Korean government to, face with some of the challenges, some other challenges, because that whatever the South Korean government says that what many countries will get out, that's what the Joe Biden wants, right? So that's really concerning. So how can we keep some distance and some issues that we're not really U.S. We are the Korean government and we'll speak our voice. I think that's things that how to strike the delicate balance in the international politics. I think that's the issue, really the big deal for the administration, how to handle it in the coming months.
Balance. And this year the G20 avoided condemning Russia for the war in Ukraine. What do you think was the thinking behind this?
Well, if you're looking at the international law perspective, that's interesting, because we talk about international organization, they come up with the consensus rule. But consensus rule, technically, there's two different types of consensus rule. First was traditional positive consensus rule, which means that traditionally what WTO, UN use it, any member object that agenda, they kill the deal. So let's say there's 100 members, there's only one country, for example, like North Korea, say no to that specific agenda, would say we will kill the deal. But that's the positive consensus. That's what the most international organizations using, just like in G20 as well. So, but because of that issue at the WTO, they come up with some different novel idea. Negative consensus means that if there's 100 country members there, all countries have to agree to kill the deal. So that's technically impossible to actually kill the deal. So the thing happened was G20. I think the point about G20 this time is in New Delhi is that they successfully reached the deal. I think the consensus, I think that's really significant political achievement by the Indian government. And they kind of, coordinating the different view and positions. I think that's the thing. But one side, upside and downside, upside was they successfully add, comment on the peace, maintaining peace in Ukraine. However, they failed to add that the Russian invasion part, condemning it. So I think it's kind of balancing because there's two different sides. As I mentioned, there's a U.S. side and the Russian side, and that they're all mixed in the G20. So they don't want to get I guess most countries actually they do not really care about the Russian. I shouldn't say Russia. It's not really their national interest on some Southeast Asia. It's far away from their country and not really close tied to the Ukraine. So they want to focus on their economic concerns, such as the WTO functioning. There's a malfunction issue, and they will complain to the Joe Biden. But the problem is, that basically the U.S. government killed WTO, so they don't want to talk it. So even though it's very interesting, the Fukushima situation that the Japanese government was saying that they're going to bring legal action against WTO action against the Chinese government, but the WTO is already dead. So what's the point? So I think the things that if we want to be South Korean government have to take very delicate balance, strike the balance where we are standing at the global stage. So you see, really, we are only the strong ally to U.S., or you are the independent sovereign country that speak our voices. I think that's really the challenge for the administration.
The African Union is set to join the G20 as a permanent member. What does this signify as China and Russia, whose leaders were absent at the G20 summit, as Professor, you mentioned, polarized in a global stage, also seem to be eyeing that region?
Very interesting. First time I read that question, I was like, oh, maybe it's a very strong sign to Russia and China. But if you look at different side, I was wondering how the EU look at it. Because EU, it become really very active on become a regional group member, like WTO also, right? They try to make their voice, right? Contribution to that. And more like they want to play a bigger role in the international, the organization. So now that there's an AU become second regional group member, that's AU, African Union was formed in 2002. It consists of like 55 countries and 1.4 billion people. That's really big community. And now it's like they have competitors, right? EU, so they have to kind of balance it. I think that's a good sign because that if you really get global, really international organization, they should have listened to all different diverse views, diverse perspectives, right? So I think that's really great in terms of the international organization, and then that also that the sending message to the Russia and China, which did not attend this meeting, because that it's not really controlled by the few countries. It's a really global international organization. If you want to be really like a UN, you have to open to all countries and make it bigger. I think that's the point.
And Professor, let's now turn our focus to the ASEAN-related summits this week. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un very likely to travel to Russia sooner than later to meet President Putin for an arms deal. President Yoon, this week at the ASEAN meeting, he warned that any attempt to military cooperation with the regime should be stopped. What do you read into his message?
Actually, I was just wondering what's really going on in North Korea, because when I read the news about what happening there, I'm just personally curious whether actually Kim Jong-un go to Russia because he never takes flight, so we'll take the train. So there's a long train all the way from Pyongyang to Moscow.
Vladivostok.
Oh, okay.
Much
closer, right?
Yes.
Okay, but still, it's like I think maybe 20 hours perhaps. And I see that my personal perspective, view about what happened in North Korea wasn't stable. I don't think they're really stable right at this moment. So I don't know about his security issue also. And plus, does it have to go there to get a deal? I was wondering because I guess that if he really wants to go there, means there's more than arms deals, right? I'm sure there's much more. That more means that in exchange for their whatever providing to Russia, they will get something from Russia, right? That's we're wondering what they're having. So and plus, but can we condemn whatever those could do? Well, we don't have. after they go there, what we can say there, but you don't have only speculations, right? We say, according to the intelligence, he might go. So it's not a fact, yes. So we'll see what happens, and we'll see. But it's not a surprise, well, I'm not surprised because last time when they have the some invitation to Chinese, the Pyongyang, their national day something, right? And there was I remember that they really made a good time with the Russian, the general, right? So I guess they always send a strong message to Russian government, say, we are communist countries, would like to help whatever it needs, right? So I guess this kind of time, we'll wait and see what they actually agree on it, and we'll have to talk about it after that.
Before I let you go, Professor, attending the East Asia Summit, President Yoon called for North Korea's nuclear and missile development as existential threat to all. And he laid heavier responsibility on UN Security Council for permanent members for sanctions on North Korea, seemingly because of this inaction by Russia and China. What do you say about the criticism that UN Security Council for being lackluster?
It's basically, in terms of like a negotiation, let's say international negotiation, if the South Korean government really want that either Russia and China attend the meeting, I have some idea. You can have a new plan. Basically, well, I don't think the Japanese government like it, but you can put it, you can have, remember the last time the UN Security Council meeting, they have very controversial on the North, Japanese government, dumping the contaminated water into their ocean, right? So, but what happened was that they were talking about issue. You can have a two agenda. Well, like to talk about the issue. If they have an issue they like to talk about, I'm sure they'll attend it. So you can embed it, you can have a new agenda, say, we'll talk about Fukushima and North Korea, please attend, right? I'm sure they'll come. But I don't know whether they extend how long they waited, but still, I think that if you want to give them some incentive to join it, we have to provide something they like to talk about. And if you want to be talking to all the way, you have to listen to me, then I can listen. So if you want to talk together, let them give some opportunity or something they want to talk about. I think that's kind of a strategy. Yeah, that's my personal view.
All right, Professor Ahn, thank you for your insight.
Thank you.
The powerful earthquake that struck Morocco on Friday night has left more than 2,000 people dead and another 2,000 injured. However, the death toll is expected to rise as rescuers struggle to reach hard-hit remote areas in their search for survivors. The 6.8 magnitude quake that hit the central part of the country at around 11 p.m. local time was the largest in 120 years and caused widespread damage in and around the city of Marrakesh, a popular tourist destination. The Moroccan government announced 3 days of national mourning. The South Korean embassy in Morocco said it has received no reports of any Korean nationals affected by the earthquake. That wraps up Arirang News Special at this hour. Thank you for watching. More news coming up at 6 p.m. Korea time.